Okay, vino Adonai Eloheinu aleinu maaseh adeinu kon ina aleinu maaseh adeinu konel. I'd like to begin this shiur tonight in Talmud Eser HaSefirot. I'd like to begin this shiur tonight to dedicate the shiur Leilun Nishmat Harav HaGaon Adin Even Yisrael Steinsaltz Zichron Tzadik Livracha Ruach Adonai Tenechenu Began Eden. וגם הרב הגאון יעקב צבי בן ליבא זיכרון צדיק לברכה רוח אדוני תניחנו בגן עדן, וגם הרב אהרון וולקין זיכרון צדיק לברכה רוח אדוני תניחנו בגן עדן, וגם אבי ומורי ועטרת ראשי צבי הרש בן מרדכי רוח אדוני תניחנו בגן עדן, וגם נפש חמי ומורי עטרת ראשי אליעזר וישעיהו דוד רוח אדוני תניחנו בגן עדן, וגם חיים שמואל יעקב בן אריה וגם נפש דוד בנימין בן משה יעקב, וגם נפש שמעיה בן עדינה, וגם נפש יצחק בן עליזה, וגם נפש יצחק בן מרים, וגם נפש הרב יהודה בן רבקה לאה. רוח אדוני תניחם בגן עדן, וגם נפש חתון חנה בת מאזן מים, וגם נפש רות בת ברחל, וגם נפש מאירה בת חיים, וגם נפש זינה בת שורה, וגם נפש חנה רחל בת בנימין יהודה, וגם נפש רחל בת לאה, וגם נפש רחל בת אסתר. רוח אדוני תניחן בגן עדן, להבדיל מן המתים לחיים רפואה שלמה for אליהו בן שרה, for שמעון משה בן עדינה, for יהושע בן משה, for חיים זלמן יהודה בן הינדה יוכבד, for דת הזב בן לאה, and for משה בן בוואי. אל נא רפא עליהם, אל נא רפא עליהם, אל נא רפא עליהם. Also רפואה שלמה for רות בת שרה, for מלצו בת פורטונה, for אסתר פרא בת חנה דבורה, for חווה מרים בת בנירזה, and for Chaya Miriam bat Eser. El Narafana Lehen, El Narafana Lehen, El Narafana Lehen. And may Hashem bring a complete and speedy recovery to all those people affected by the coronavirus and any other illnesses that the Jewish people may have. May they have a complete recovery. In the Zchut of the Torah we're going to learn tonight. El Narafana Lehem, El Narafana Lehem, El Narafana Lehem. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen, and we're in Parak Bet of the book Talmud Eser HaSefirot. And we're just going to do the top parts of all of the entire book. I sent it to the chat, everyone. It'd be highly advisable to purchase the set if you're going to stay with the Shir Be'ezrat Hashem, because we're going to basically go through all 7 volumes relatively quickly, because we're just going to do the top, and then we're going to come back to the beginning of the book, and then we're going to do the bottom. And that's based on the rabbi's recommendations that he had in the Hakdama, that he said the first thing we should do is finish the entire Sefer with all the concepts that are on top, even though we may not understand all the concepts in their completeness, because we're only going to understand the mashal, we're not going to understand the nimshal. The nimshal will be explained on the bottom, but nevertheless, it's important for a person to get the picture of what was called the ilan, which is basically the tree of basically is the hishtal shalut, the development, how it began from the initial factors of the Ein Sof with the Tzimtzum, and then we're going to discuss today the next thing that happened after that in order, and then we're going to go through all the different levels, all the different worlds, till we get to our world, and then we're going to go back and we're going to do a review, and we're going to go to the Or Pnimi, which is exactly what the rabbi suggested. I just want to make one caution that even though, we have to use certain terms to talk about these spiritual items, we are stuck as human beings that we have to use words to describe very, very sublime topics. We should never make the mistake in thinking that there's any hagshama, that there's any materialism whatsoever in the spiritual worlds. Even for something as ephemeral as or, which one can argue light is the most, shall we say, sublime of the physical concepts, like we discussed in last week's shiur, light is still a physical concept. There is no light in the shamayim. There is no, so we're going to see, when we read various things, we're going to see certain terms. All of these terms have nimshal. We are only right now focused on the mashal. We're going to focus on the imagery. We're going to focus on exactly what it says to understand the meaning of the words. And then we're going to go back and understand the nimshal later on. But once again, I'll repeat over and over and over again as we go through the class to be very, very cautious, not to think in any way, shape, or form that there's any physicality in the shamayim. That would be kfirah. That would be a very, very bad situation. So in Parak Bet, which says over here, Meva'er Hashem me'or ein sof baruch Hashem himshich kav or le'olamot shene'etzlu v'nivru b'mkom hachalal shenintztamsem bo he'anyanim. So in this parak, which is a relatively short parak, he's going to explain how from the Or Ein Sof, which is the emanation of the Ein Sof, the Or emanation of the Ein Sof, Baruch Hashem, Himshich kav, a kav. We'll decide, we'll see what a kav is. For lack of a better term right now, it's a line. Or la'olamot, which means if we understand, like we discussed last week, that the tzimtzum began at a central point and then spread out to all the tzdadim, all of the sides equally in the shape of a circle, in the shape of an agol, in the shape of a circle. And now we understand that we have basically that circle, and then we have outside that circle is the Or Ein Sof, which basically is there. And we discussed last week the concept of the tzimtzum. We use two different words to describe the tzimtzum. One is a contraction and one is a concealment. They are both right. They're a little different, but they're both right. There's a contraction of the light of the Ein Sof out to the sides in a circular pattern. So this way, that's why it's equal on all sides, like we discussed last week about the hashva'ah in all different directions. That's what makes a circle unique, that every point in the circle, as long as it's within the same arc, is equidistant from the center. And that's why it's not in the shape, again, shape, physical. We're not talking physical, we're talking spiritual. And there are deeper concepts here. We're trying to illustrate them by these physical concepts. And that's why it's not in the shape of a square, not in the shape of a triangle, because in both of those shapes, the corner is more distant than the center. And that cannot be. It has to be hashva, has to be equal everywhere. And now we're going to understand that from the Or Ein Sof, that there's going to be a kav, himshich kav, a line, or la'olamot, to the worlds. Now, of course, the worlds right now, there are no other worlds. There's only the world of the Ein Sof, yes? And the beginning of the world of the tzimtzum, shall we say. But there is no other worlds right now. That's what we're going to discuss, Be'ezrat Hashem, in the next couple of chapters. Shene'etzlu, the word ne'etzlu, which means from the word etzel in Hebrew, which is near, which is an emanation. The nivru'u. The nivru'u is created, and the rabbi is being very, very cautious about his words. Of course, these words are from the Arizal, which means ne'etzal is for the world of Atzilut, which we haven't even talked about yet. That is called the Atzilut. That is Etzel. That is the closest. That's the world of emanation. And then we have the Nivraim. The Nivraim, there's a pirud, there's a separation between the Atzilut and the world of the creation, which is the world of the Bria, the Yetzirah, and Asiyah, which we will, Be'ezrat Hashem, talk about. And all of these four worlds, which means the Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, are all in the makom, not physical makom, spiritual makom, of the Chalal. The Chalal is the space that was left when the Or Ein Sof vacated the igol, the circle, where that space is called the Chalal. That's called also Makom Panui. And we see all these have deep spiritual meanings. We just want to understand the physical meanings here, but there is no physicality here. Let's not make that mistake. Shenim Tzamtzem, that was concealed or contracted. And there were 5 inyanim in this aspect. 1. Min Ein Sof himshich kav or letoch hachalal. From the Or Ein Sof, from the Ein Sof, the kav came into the chalal. Next, Rosh hakav nogea be'Ein Sof velo siyumo. The Rosh, the head, the beginning of the kav, is in direct contact with the Ein Sof. But the kav does not go through and through to the other side, which means the siyum of the kav is not on the other side. If you understand, it's a circle, that if you come in on one side and you go straight through, it's a diameter, you go to the other side. That is not how it was, which means the kav stopped at another point, which is before it got to the other end of the circle, and that's the concept of the nogea be'Ein Sof ve'lo b'siyumo, but not below and not at the end. Next, derech hakav mitpashet Or Ein Sof le'olamot. Through the kav, through the way of the kav, and the kav is really a tzinor. It's really a pipe that contains the Or Ein Sof, which penetrates the halal. By the way of the kav, the tzinor, this pipe, mitpashet, the light of the Ein Sof is spreads to all the olamot and to the sof olamot. Or Ein Sof la'olamot goes to the end of it, goes to all the worlds, which means the Or Ein Sof is in all the worlds through the kav. Next, Kol ha'olamot hem bimkom hachalal hahu shenimtzamtzem, and all of the worlds that we're going to discuss in the entire Kabbalah, all of these worlds are within the Chalal, which is in that space that was vacated kav yachol by the Or Ein Sof. And hey, kodem hatzimtzum haya hu ushmo echad ve'en sechel yachol lahasigo. Now, before the tzimtzum, before this concealment, before this contraction, we have the concept of Hu haya hu echad hu ushmo echad. They're both one. And this is not a concept that we can understand as human beings. That's why we have no ability to appreciate the Ein Sof whatsoever. We're going to learn there are certain items that even within the Chalal we are not permitted to talk about. We're only permitted to discuss briefly, but we're not permitted to delve inside. That's from the Sefer Yetzirah, where it says, "Ba'mufla mimcha al tidrosh." From something that is above your ability, do not waste, do not spend any time. That's how a person gets themselves into trouble. A person has to understand their limitations, and this is the same limitation that Moshe Rabbeinu had, which means this is not a limitation of a person's ability. This is a limitation of human beings completely. And in fact, angels, we will see, have no greater ability in these areas either. Angels, all the Nivraim, cannot understand this concept of Hu ushmo echad. This is not human or angelic or any created being's comprehension. So that's the introduction. Any questions so far? Okay, now we're going to go to the bottom, the big words. Min ein sof himshich kav or latocha chalal. So that was the first concept, the concept of from the ein sof, there was a kav that came into the chalal. Vihine, and therefore. Achar hatzimtzum hanomrim mamala. But after the tzimtzum that we said before, of course, here we're talking about perhaps before there's a concept of zman. We have to understand what this means. Achar hatzimtzum, but we'll leave that alone for now. We briefly touched on that last week, but not in any detail. Asher az nishar makom hachalal ve'avir panui ve'rekani be'emtza or ha'ein sof mamash k'nu mamala. And then, of course, now the rabbi is repeating himself. We're going to see this a very common item during the Kabbalah when a person is studying. There's repetition because you're building on what was before, and it's very, very important to be rebuilding on that, and that's how a person doesn't make, God forbid, mistakes. And in these things, mistakes are very, very dangerous. It says here, Az asher az nishar makom halal. So when there was a tzimtzum, there was left this makom, again, not a physical space, a spiritual space. Makom halal, this space, it's empty space. The avir panui, an air that was open, that was free. Again, there is no air. Air is a physical concept. Verekani, and empty. Well, all of these have significant spiritual concepts, which we're not going to talk about yet. Be'emtza or ein sof, in the middle of the or ein sof, which how do you understand the middle of something is infinite? We're going to leave that alone for now. Mamash k'rumal, like we said above. Hine kvar haya makom shichlu liyot sham hane'etzalim v'anivraim v'yitzurim v'ne'asim. And this is now the place, or the spiritual place, or the reality. That would be a much better term, even though it's not great. The reality, the makom is denoting the reality of the presence of the worlds, of the Atzilut, which is the Ne'etzalim, the Nivraim is the Bria, the Yitzurim is the Yetzirah, and the Na'asim is the Asiyah. All of these worlds are within that space called the Chalal. The Az Himshich Min Or, and then there was, we understand the kav is a tzinor, is a pipe, okay? Because first you have the kav, and then you have az himshich min or, and there was a connection, or a drawing, or a continuance of the or of Ein Sof into the halal through the kav. Continuing on, min or Ein Sof, kav echad yashar. Of course, this kav is straight; it's not bent or crooked. Chas v'shalom. Min haor ha'agol shalom milamala lamata. From the light, because remember, the or Ein Sof surrounds the circles, surrounds the igol, surrounds the halal in all directions. Okay, so from that or Ein Sof, it penetrates the kav, comes into the halal, and the or then goes into the kav milamala lamata, from above and below. That's precisely why we cannot allow that kav does not go to the other end. Because if the kav went through and through to the other end, then there would be no concept of mala and mata. And the next needs to be a concept of mala and mata, so there can be a concept of richuk and kiruv, closeness and distance. Because we in this world are the world that is the furthest distant from the Hashem, from the Or Ein Sof, yes, than each one of these worlds. So that the Atzilut is closer to the world of the Ein Sof, yes? And then the Bria is closer to the Atzilut, but it's further from the Ein Sof. This concept of distance, again, we're talking spiritual, not physical distance, but there could not be that concept. If the Kav went through and through, then there would be no way to understand what's Mala and Mata. So Mala is going to be where the Kav is penetrating the Halal and the Or Ein Sof is coming in. Mata is where anything that is below that doesn't get that's below that. Umishtal shel, and this word mishtal shel is develop. It's like a chain of development. This is a very important concept. The yored tocha halal hahu, and so the Or Ein Sof goes into the halal through the kav in that space that was created by the vacating, or the shall we say, the concealment or the contraction of the Or Ein Sof from the halal. Anybody have any questions on what we just discussed? Okay. Next. Bet. Rosh hakav nogea be'Ein Sof velo siyumo. The rosh, the top of the kav, is nogea, is touching the Ein Sof, but the siyum of the kav does not touch the Ein Sof on the other end. The Rosh Elyon Shalakav, and that's why we can say there's a concept of Elyon and Tachton. How would you be able to say Elyon and Tachton if it was through and through? The Rosh Elyon Shalakav, the Elyon of the Kav, Nimshach mina Ein Sof atzmo v'neogea bo. It draws connected to the Ein Sof and is touching it, and that is the only part of the Halal that is in direct contact with the Ein Sof. Of course, we're not talking anything physical. This is all spiritual. All of this is nimshal, but we have to understand the mashal. Omnam siyum kavazeh, but the end of the kav, lemata besofo eino nogea be'or Ein Sof. The end of the kav does not touch the Or Ein Sof, shall we say, on the other side of the agol. Any questions on that? Gimel. Derech hakav mitpashet Or Ein Sof le'olamot. Through the kav, mitpashet, the or of the Ein Sof, comes into the olamot, the worlds. V'derech hakav hazeh nimshach v'nitpashet Or Ein Sof lemata. And through this kav, which is the tzinor, which is this pipe, the or of the Ein Sof is nimshach, is drawn or is continued, v'nitpashet, and spreads Or Ein Sof lemata, down into the place where it had previously vacated, but only in the place of the kav is the Or Ein Sof found. Any questions on that? Dalet. Kol ha'olamot hem b'makom ha'chalal hahu shenimtzamtzem. U'b'makom ha'chalal hahu, and in this place, this space, of course, not a physical space, a spiritual space of the halal, ha'etzil u'bara, again, the terms, He'etzil is emanate. Bara is created. Remember, creation doesn't begin until the world of the Bria, which is bara. The concept of bara is yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. That is the beginning of the Bria. That is the Bria. That's bara. The Atzilut is before. Okay, the Atzilut, Kavyachol, what does that mean before? If Zman is created in Breshit, we have to leave that alone for now. But the concept of the Atzilut preceded the Bria. And that's why he's using the term Atzilut and Bria. And there's a significant difference between the world of Atzilut and the world of the Bria, which we're not going to talk about now. Ve'yatzar ve'asa kol ha'omot kulam. And ve'yatzar. So now the bara, the bria, is causing yetzira. What is yetzira? Yetzira is yesh meyesh. So bria is yesh me'ayin. So kavyachol, the atzilut is the ayin. The yesh me'ayin is the bria. And then from the bria we have the yetzira, which is the yesh meyesh. Since the bria is yesh and the yetzira is yesh, that's yesh meyesh. That is the concept of yetzira. The asa is once again, that is the makeb patish, as we say in the laws of Shabbat, the final hammer blow of the world. That is the world of the asiyah. That's the world that we are living in. That is the actual physical world that we are living in. Kol ha'amot kulam. Of course, here we're talking, when we're talking about the world of asiyah, there's a spiritual aspect of that as well as a physical aspect of that, but we're going to leave that alone for now. Any questions on that? Okay, thank you, Moti. I see you don't have a mic, but you can hear. We're going to have to get your microphone. Hey, Kodem hatzimtzum haya hu ushmo echad ve'en sechel yachol lahasigo. Now, use the term sechel. Sechel is intelligence. That is everything other than Hashem, which means angels and all these things. This is called sechel. If you look at the Rambam, he calls them sechalim, which means the sechalim, which are the angels. Yes. So we understand from here that kodem hatzimtzum hu hayahu shmo echad, with this concept, which we just have to accept this concept without any understanding of it whatsoever. Ve'en sechel yachol lahasigo, and no sechel, angel or human being, can achieve an understanding of this concept. Hey, Kodem hadalad olamot elu, before these dalad olamot elu. Now, we have to be very, very cautious. What does this mean? The world of the Atzilut always existed. It was not part of the creation, because we said that the world of the Bria is Yesh Me'ayin. So we need to understand, what does this mean, Kodem Adalat Alamot? Because the world of the Atzilut is not, it's considered to be godly. It's not considered to be it's not a creation. So we understand that there was something new about the world of the Atzilut. Unlike the world of the Bria, Yetzirah, and Asirah, which were new creations, the world of the Atzilut was not a new creation, Chas v'shalom. That's kfirah to say that. The world of the Atzilut, what's new about it? That it was newly able to be revealed. It was perceivable. That's the difference. And what gave the koach to the world of the Atzilut to be perceived is the tzimtzum. But we're going to leave that alone for now. That's Ramchal. Kodem hadal omot elu. Before these four worlds, Haya Ein Sof, there was only the Ein Sof. Yes, before anything we've talked about, there was Or Ein Sof. That's how he began in the beginning of the book last week. That first there was, before anything was made, there was Ein Sof, Pashut. There was only Ein Sof, nothing else. Hu Echad U'Shmo Echad. He is one and his name is one. This concept of him in one and his name is one, this is beyond the hasaga of intelligent beings or any beings. Be'achdut, next page, nifla v'ne'elam yitbarach. Nifla, which is wondrous, and ne'elam is hidden. It's hidden because it is beyond the hasaga, beyond the comprehension of anyone. She'en koach afilu b'malachim hakrovim elav. That there's no koach, there's no power, that even the malachim that are closer to him, because the malachim are basically in the world of the Bria and the Yetzirah. That's where the malachim, kavyachol, from a spiritual point of view, are found. We, of course, are in the world of the Asiyah, but we have aspects of our being, which, of course, is the Neshama, depending on the different levels. That's from the different olamot. But we'll leave that alone for now. But even in these malachim, which are closer, krovim elav, they do not have the koach. The enam hasaga be'en sof yitbarach. They have no koach to understand Ein Sof. Ein Sof is Hu echad u'shmo echad. This is beyond comprehension of malachim, beyond the comprehension of human beings. Ki ein shum sechel nivra sheyuchal lahasigo, because there is no created intelligence that can understand it. And of course, there's only one intelligence that is not created, and that, of course, is Hashem b'chodo v'atzmo. That is the only intelligence that is not created, that is extant. All other intelligences are created, including the angels. We understand that the angels were created on the second day, which means the angels were part of the creation. They have a beginning, okay, just like human beings have a beginning. And this is very important. There is no, the Ein Sof has no makom, because makom is basically a factor of the world, shall we say. En lo makom, velo gvul, and no border, and lo shem, and no name. That's vital. That's precisely why we cannot understand. That's one of the reasons why we can't understand this, is because in order to talk, we have to be able to give shemot to things. We see that we're giving names to things that are very, very spiritual concepts, but we can't give names to God, even though we see that God does have names, okay? But that's basically describing how God relates to us. That is what the entire Kabbalah talks about. The Kabbalah says nothing about the being himself, known as God. No human being we're reading here can begin to comprehend anything about God, his being. But all we can do is based in his interaction with us. That's how we can get to know him, the best that we can do. And that's through the Shemot. And that's why the shiur we do on Monday night, Sha'arei Orah, is so important, because that's describing all of the Shemot of Hashem and what they mean, all these kind of things. And all of these are connections to us, because all of these Shemot are describing how Hashem connects to us. And that is the entirety of the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah says nothing about the essence of the being that is God. All it says is how that being relates to the created world, which is us. Any questions on that? And part of the reason why we can't, because we are finite beings. We have a beginning and maybe not an end, depending on Tchiyat HaMeitim, of course. This, we could talk about that another time. But when you have a finite being, finite beings cannot understand things that have no gvul, have no border. And that's why we do not have any hasaga of the essence of Hashem. Okay. All right, so that's it for basically the first chelek. Okay, we're going to now go to chelek bet. Okay, chelek sheni, and that again we've skipped a lot. If you have the book, you'll see a lot of pages will skip, but that's all the explanation and the nimshal. And we're not going to do that now because we're following exactly what the rabbi told us of how to study his book, and that's why it's so important for a person to read the introduction to a book, because sometimes you make mistakes. You don't read the introduction, and then it's like not reading the question before giving an answer on a test. So now we're doing Chelek Shei. We finished Chelek Rishon, which basically discussed two concepts. Discussed the concept of the Tzimtzum and discussed the concept of the Kav. That's it. Now we're in Chelek Sheni, and if I'm not mistaken, there are 16 Chalakim in this book. Okay, we'll get to them all Be'ezrat Hashem sooner or later. Chelek Sheni, Igulim veYosher kolel bet prakim. So now we have two other concepts called Igulim and Yosher. We'll go into more detail about that. Igulim are basically circles, and Yosher are something that is straight. And we'll get to understand this a little more detail when we look into the chapter a little bit more. Perek Aleph. So this is broken up into two prakim. So now we're doing Chelek Sheni, Perek Aleph. Mevaer Eser Sefirot de Igulim Shenit Galu Achar HaTzimtzum. This is going to explain the 10 Sefirot. Now, we haven't really defined what Sefirot are yet. We're just going to suffice to say spheres. We'll leave that alone for now. Mevaer Eser Sefirot de Igulim, the 10 Sefirot of the Igulim, of the circles, Shenit Galu Achar HaTzimtzum, that were revealed after the Tzimtzum. Now, that is an essential. Nit Galu. What does that mean? They were always there, which means it's nothing that was created. That's a very, very important concept. A person who doesn't understand this is making a big mistake. Better off not learning. To understand that this world here we're talking about now, which is the Igulim, which is this first world that we're talking about here, was always in existence. The only difference is before the Tzimtzum, it was subsumed within the infinite Ein Sof, and therefore it had no ability to be perceived at all or even spoken about by human beings. So through the Tzimtzum, that now allows us to be able to talk about these concepts here, which is the concept of the Gilui, or the revelation of after the Tzimtzum. Before the Tzimtzum, there is no revelation. There's nothing other than God. The Or Ein Sof Makifam, and the Or Ein Sof is Makif. Makif means surrounding, yes? The Chol Or Shel Sefirot HaIgulim Mushpa Lahem Al Yedei HaKav. And all of the Or, all of the emanated Or, for lack of a better term, we're not talking physical light, all of the emanated Or that comes from the Ein Sof comes to the Igulim by way of the Kav. Okay? Ubo Yud Aleph Inyanim. And there are 11 Inyanim, 11 items in this Chelek. Okay? We're going to go through the 11 items, and then hopefully we'll do with a couple of them, and then we'll have to stop and we'll continue next week. Aleph. Hakav hu ke'en tzinor dak. So now the rabbi clarifies what he sort of hinted to before, but now he's going to clarify. And we'll see that's often what happens. That earlier on, things are brought up in a kolel, in a klal, and then as we dig deeper, as we get further on in the hishtal shalut, we'll get the pratim, we'll get the details. And this is very, very important for understanding things, da mevin davar mitoch davar. But we'll leave that alone for now. Hakavhu ke'en tzinor dak. The kav is like a tzinor, a pipe that is dak, that is very, very thin. And in that kav, in that tzinor, whereas the Or Ein Sof is penetrating the halal. Next, bet. Hitpashtut or Ein Sof latoch hachalal. So now we're going to discuss. So in the previous chapter we discussed the concept of the kav. Now we're going to say, well, what happens when that or Ein Sof comes into the halal? What is happening there? Okay. Next, Gimel. Hitpashtut hayta le'at lat. Now, what does this mean? Lat, slowly. What does it mean? Slowly. There's no time here yet. Leave that alone for now. Suffice it to say, we have to talk some terms so we understand things. Okay, so it's la'at, which means it happens in a developmental type of way. Ha'egol eno davuk daled. Ha'egol eno davuk be'en sof. Now this is also important. The agol, the igulim, these circles that are within inside the halal, are not attached to the Ein Sof, okay? Which means there's a border, there's a gvul between the Ein Sof and the halal. Like we said before, the only or that penetrates the halal is through the kav. Other than that, there is no or from the Ein Sof that is penetrating the halal. So therefore, the agol is not attached to the Ein Sof, ela mikushar bo derech hakav. The only connection the egol has, the circle the spheres have, is with the kav, which of course that kav is that one dark pipe that is from the top down, but not all the way down. Hey, or Ein Sof makif umashpia el ha'agol merachok. So now he says that the Or Ein Sof is makif, the concept of surrounding, umashpia, and influences the egol merachok, from a distance. We'll leave that alone in more detail. We'll talk about that, Be'ezrat Hashem, when we get more detail in the chapter. Vav, hakav nikra Adam Kadmon. So now we have a new concept, Adam Kadmon. So the kav is basically called Adam Kadmon. If you look in the books of the Kabbalah, we discussed the four worlds, the Atzilut, the Bria, the Yetzirah, and Asiyah. There is actually a world that is before the Atzilut. It's called Adam Kadmon. Why is it called Adam Kadmon? Let's not make this mistake. Let's not mix up the concept of Adam Kadmon and Adam Harishon. Those are two completely different concepts. Adam Harishon was a man that was made at the end of the creative process, okay? Adam Kadmon is not a man. Adam in Hebrew, if you look in the Kabbalistic sources, Adam is Olam. And that's why the Gemara says, Adam is Olam Katan, which means we understand from here that a person is their own world. Yes, everybody looks at the world through their own perspective. That is the simple meaning when the Gemara says Adam is Olam Katan. But we also have to understand that the word Adam means Olam. So when we say Adam Kadmon, what we really mean is Olam Kadmon. Okay? And technically, we can refer to the other worlds also by the term Adam. So just like there's Adam Kadmon, there's Adam Atzilut, there's Adam Bria, there's Adam Yetzirah, and there's Adam Asiyah. This is just a term. Adam is a term that denotes Olam. Okay? And the word Olam is from the word Ne'elam, which is hidden, which he already hinted to over here when we discussed this before. Hakav nikra Adam Kadmon. So the Kav is called Adam Kadmon. Zayin. Seder Yetziat HaSefirot Igulim. And then he's going to discuss how the Igulim, how the 10 spheres of the Igulim, how they were developed, how they came out from the Kav. Next. Hakav mechaber et kol ha'igulim yachad. The kav is what connects all the igulim together. Tet. Kol olam v'chol sfira kulim Eser sfirot pratiyot umiprate pratiyot le'en ketz. Now this is important. Every world, everything in the Kabbalah is made out of 10 sfirot, okay? There's different combinations, how you put them together, partsufim, we'll leave that alone for now. But the bottom line is there are 10 sfirot. And within those 10 sfirot, there are also 10 sfirot, and then 10 sfirot, and then 10 sfirot ad infinitum. If you want to understand an analogy in mathematics, okay? We understand that there are an infinite number of integers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's an infinite number of integers, yes? And we have, all of our mathematics is basically base 10. So we have only 10 digits, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's all we have. There is that every other digit after that is made of a combination of one of other two digits, okay? So that's the math. Now, between the integers 1 and 2, okay, we have 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, 1.9. 1.0 obviously. So we have 10 also. Within the 1 to 2, we have 10 decimal spaces. And then I can continue on. There's 1.01, 1.02, 1.03, 1.04. And I can continue doing that over and over and over again. Same concept. Okay? Of course, that is physical. And here we're talking spiritual. Okay? And the whole goal of studying the physical world is so we can get better understanding of the spiritual world. The reason we study science, in addition for mathematics and to get healing and to all kinds of things to be able to make our lives easier, but the essential reason to study science is so we can begin to get a shed of light on how the spiritual worlds, as it says, Marabu ma'asecha kulam bechokhma asita. How great are your ma'asim, are your deeds? Kulam bechokhma asita. Chokhma ila'a. Everything is made with the chokhma ila'a. And that is how we can learn about these sublime concepts through understanding, a better understanding of the physical world. And not just the natural world, but also the human body, which we will discuss Be'ezrat Hashem as we go along a little further. Okay, continuing on. But again, no physicality. These are all spiritual concepts. We're using terms because we have nothing else to talk about. Okay, we have we have to use some words to talk about these spiritual concepts, and we're only going through the mashal. We are not talking about the nimshal. We haven't said anything about what any of this means yet. Okay, it's like when Yirmiyah saw Sir Nafuach, he saw a boiling pot. There's no boiling pot. In his imagination, he saw a boiling pot, and that imagination, that was the mashal. And the nimshal was mitzafon tipatach hara'ah, that all the difficulty is going to come from the north, which was the exile that was going to come from Bavel. This is what Yirmiyah saw, which means the prophet, through his faculty of the imagination, is able to see the nimshal in his imagination, and then he sees the mashal in his imagination, and he understands the nimshal based on his prophetic ability. This is this similar concept here. The concept of we're just talking about the mashal. We are not dealing at all with the nimshal. Any questions so far? Okay, continue on. Yud. Sfirot de'igulim makifot zo et zo kigalde betzalim. The sfirot of the igulim, because they're a sphere within a sphere, so the outer one, shall we say, is the outer sphere, and then inside there's another one, and then inside there's another one, and inside there's another one. So we understand that the sfirot igulim are makif. Each one is makif, is surrounding the other one, like galdei betzalim, like the skin of an onion. If you look at an onion, you open up an onion, it's in pieces. You pull one layer, there's another layer underneath. You pull that layer, there's another layer underneath, and a layer. That's an onion. That's kikaldei betzalim. This is the world of the igulim. Okay? Continuing on. Kol igol hakarov le'ensof yoter mechavero. Every agol, every world of every one of the igulim, any one of the sfirot of the igulim, that is closer to the Ein Sof. How do we determine what's closer? What's closer to the Ein Sof based on the Kaf? Yes, continuing on. Nivchan le'elyon mushubach mechavero. It's basically delineated as elyon, higher, and meshubach, and more praiseworthy than his friend. Because distance from Hashem is not good, closeness with Hashem is good. Yes? So the bottom line is something is meshubach when it's closer to Hashem. So closer to the Ein Sof. So therefore the sfirot of the igulim that are on the outside are closer to the Ein Sof than the igulim that are on the inside. Until we get now, just like we have the olam of the Adam Kadmon, we have the Atzilut, we have the Bria, Asiyah, so we have the Igulim of all of those as well, and the Igul that represents the olam Asiyah is the furthest away from the Ein Sof, and that is in the center of the Halal. Hu betachlit hagashmiut, and that's where the gashmiut, that's the place, that's the tachlit, that's the space of the gashmiut, which is in the center of the halal. Okay, any questions? Okay. Let's do the first one. Hakav hu ke'en tzinor dak. The kav is a tzinor. It's a pipe that is narrow. The kav zeh, this kav, ke'en tzinor dak echad. It's like a pipe that is thin, one thin pipe. Asher bo mitpashet v'nimshach, that in that pipe is mitpashet, is spread out, v'nimshach, and drawn, mimei or elyon, from the or elyon, shel ein sof, of the ein sof, el ha'olamot, to the worlds, asher bimkom ha'avir v'chalal hahu. And that is where the or ein sof in the chalal is only found in the kav. Okay, any questions on that? Bet. Hitpashtut or ein sof latoch hachalal. Ha'itpashtut hayta le'at le'at. This is what we discussed previously. Bet. V'nebiot or ha'ein sof nimshach. We said that the or the ein sof is nimshach, is drawn b'vchinat kav yashar toch hachalal ha'nirmala, by way of a kav that is straight into the chalal, like we discussed above. Lo nimshach v'nitpashet techef ad lemata. It didn't immediately the kav go, the or ein sof go through the kav all the way to the mata, to the world of the lowest world. That's not how it happened. Omnam haya mitpashet le'at le'at, but it would happen gradually. Ritzoni lomar, it is my will to say, this is what the rabbi says, this is from the words of the Etz Chaim, ki betchila hitchil kav ha'or le'itpashet. And in the beginning, when the kav began to mitpashet, began to come into the chalal, that was the beginning, yes, v'sham techef, and then immediately, betchilat hitpashtuto besod kav, when the or came in through that sinor in the kav, in the sod of the kav, nitpashet v'nimshach v'naaseh. It was spread out, and it was spread, and it was made. What was made? En galgal echad, like one sphere. Igol mesaviv. So basically, as the or ein sof came into the chalal, and then what happened is the first of the sfirot was made of the igulim, and that we'll see is called the sfira of the keter. Any questions on that? All right, we'll do maybe one or two more, and then we'll stop. Ha'igol eno davuk be'en sof ela mikosher bo derech hakav. So the igol is not attached to the Ein Sof. Only the way it's attached to the Ein Sof is by the way of the kav, which means in the rest of the sphere, in the rest of the circle, there is no attachment to the Ein Sof. There's a border, but only through the kav is the igol, is it attached to the Ein Sof. The igol hazeh, and this circle, haya bilti davuk imor ha'ein sof hasovev alav mikol tzedadav, was not attached to the or ein sof that is surrounding. So this first igol we're talking about, which is the first igol, as soon as it came in, it made a circle around. Yes, that first one is not attached in any way to the ein sof from all the sides. Of course, not sides, but the arc of the circle, the circumference of the circle. She'im yitdabek bo, because if there would be this concept of dveikut with the or ein sof, yachazor hadavar lekamut shehaya, it will return back to the way it was before, which means these borders are necessary to give reality or to give revelation to that circle. If there would be no border, then that would be melded to the or ein sof, and basically it would kavyachol cease to exist, although not really, because it would be subsumed by the infinite of the or ein sof. Continue on. V'yeh mitbatel be'or ein sof. That's exactly what the rabbi just said. It would be canceled out, like the concept of bitul, canceled out. Even though something falls into a chillant and it's milk, there's still milk in there. It's batel b'shishim, but that doesn't mean there's no milk particles in there. But it's mivatel, it's bitul, compared to the massive amount of meat there is there 60 times. This, of course, is infinite times, okay? So that's the bitul, you can't imagine more bitul than that. V'lo yitra kocho klal, and that is the goal. The entire purpose of the worlds that we're talking about, this entire hishtal shalut, is to allow there to be the ability to see something, even though here we can't see anything. But the bottom line is, as we go further down and as we get closer and closer, we're going to have more ability to understand and see and understand how Hashem is interacting with the world. That's the goal of the world, that the rabbi said in the beginning. V'lo yitra kocho klal. So if there wasn't for this border, there would be no way for this to be perceived, because it would be subsumed within the Ein Sof. V'yeh kol or Ein Sof levad karishona. And it would be like the or Ein Sof like it was in the beginning. And that's the same thing that would happen if the Kav went through and through. If the Kav went through and through, everything in the middle would just disappear, because it would be subsumed within the infinite or of the Ein Sof. V'lachen ha'agol hazeh samuch agol Ein Sof. And therefore this agol that is samuch, that is close as can be, but there's that border, okay, to the agol, the Ein Sof, which would be the makif, as we discussed earlier, ubitim mitdabek, but it's not attached to it. The only place that agol attaches to the Ein Sof is in the kav. The whole ikar hitkashrut dvekut ha'agol hane'etzal lahu im ha'Ein Sof mi'hamatzil, and the entire hitkashrut, attachment, and dvekut, and connection of the agol that is ne'etzal, very careful word, ne'etzal, emanated, because it always existed, it just now has a reality, revelation, has the ability to be perceived because of the tzimtzum, because of the border that we discussed. Okay, hahu im Ein Sof ha'ma'atzil, with the ma'atzil, the Ein Sof is the emanator, okay, and the igol is the emanatee. Hu al yidei ha'kav hahu ne'mimala. That's only by way of the kav. And that's why in the kav, that's all Ein Sof, which means there's no differentiating in different levels over there. Asher derach darach bo, that is darach, that the kav was darach in there. Yored v'nimshach or min Ein Sof mashpia be'egol hahu. And then or comes from the Ein Sof into the kav, and then it's mashpia, influences the kav, that influences the agol that we just described over here. Okay, I think we're going to stop here. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you so much. Have a good night. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.